Jonathan Ashford stormed into his sleek corner office, his shoes tapping rhythmically against the marble floor. The polished glass walls of the towering building reflected the soft glow of the early morning sun, but inside Jonathan's head, a storm was brewing. His assistant, Lily Caldwell, had always been the first person to greet him with the day's agenda in hand, her desk meticulously organized. Today, however, her chair sat empty. He glanced at his watch, 8:30 a.m. sharp. Lily was never late. Ever. With growing impatience, Jonathan scanned the room. A faint scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air, but something felt off, wrong even. He noticed a small stack of files on her desk, untouched. Next to it, something else caught his eye, a folded piece of paper, partially tucked under her keyboard. His gut tightened as he moved toward it. It was unlike Lily to leave anything out of place. He unfolded the paper with steady but firm hands, expecting to find an innocuous note, perhaps about a last-minute errand or a reminder. Instead, the message chilled him to the core. She knows. The words, scrawled in Lily's neat handwriting, felt like a punch to his gut. She knows? Jonathan's brow furrowed as he stared at the cryptic message, trying to make sense of it. His mind raced, bouncing between a dozen different scenarios. But the question that echoed most loudly was who knows, and what exactly? Without warning, the door to his office swung open. His wife, Amelia, glided in, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Amelia's presence in the office was rare. Her usual routine was brunches, charity events, and public appearances, carefully curated to maintain their image as the city's most powerful couple. Today, however, she seemed unusually present. "Jonathan, darling," she greeted, her voice smooth. "I was wondering if we could." Her words faded into the background as Jonathan's thoughts lingered on the note. He folded it quickly and shoved it into his pocket before Amelia could notice. "What is it?" Amelia's tone shifted, eyes narrowing. Her perfectly manicured fingers fiddled with the strap of her designer bag. Jonathan gave a tight smile, shaking his head. "It's nothing," he lied, glancing down at the files Lily had prepared. His mind was buzzing now, filled with too many questions. Was it possible that Amelia could be involved in whatever had spooked Lily? The idea was absurd, wasn't it? Yet, the note had said, "She knows." "Amelia, have you seen Lily today?" Jonathan asked, his voice deceptively calm. "No," she replied, her expression neutral. "I haven't seen her in days, actually." "Why?" Her gaze sharpened, the calculating glint that Jonathan had come to recognize as her go-to defense mechanism. He hesitated for a second, choosing his words carefully. "She didn't come into work this morning. It's unusual." Amelia shrugged lightly. Maybe she needed a break. She works hard, after all. But I wouldn't worry, Jonathan. She'll show up. Jonathan's mind churned. Something about Amelia's casual dismissal unsettled him. But before he could push further, Amelia shifted topics, launching into a discussion about an upcoming charity gala. He nodded absent-mindedly, but his thoughts kept circling back to Lily. She was reliable, responsible. Something had to be wrong. As Amelia left the room, the unsettling silence returned. Jonathan pulled out his phone, dialing Lily's number. It rang once, twice, before going to voicemail. He left a brief message, trying to mask the growing concern in his voice. "Lily, it's Jonathan. Call me when you get this." An hour passed. Then two. By noon, the creeping unease had morphed into full-blown worry. Jonathan paced the length of his office, eyes flicking repeatedly to his phone, hoping for it to ring. He sent emails, messages, but nothing came back. The emptiness of her desk began to feel like a gaping hole in his otherwise controlled life. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Detective Harris," a gruff voice answered after the second ring. "It's Jonathan Ashford," Jonathan replied, his voice low but firm. "I need your help. My assistant has gone missing." Hours later, Jonathan sat behind his desk, staring at Lily's untouched files. Detective Harris had promised to look into it, but it could take time. The nagging fear at the back of Jonathan's mind refused to let go. He pulled the note from his pocket again, studying the words as if they might reveal more the second time. "She knows." Jonathan's fingers tightened around the paper, and his pulse quickened. The more he thought about it, the more he felt certain that Lily's disappearance was tied to a secret, one connected to his wife. But what did Amelia know? And why would Lily feel the need to warn him? The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Jonathan grabbed it, hoping to hear Lily's voice. Instead, Detective Harris's voice rumbled through the line. "I've been to Lily's apartment," Harris said gravely. "It's empty. No sign of a struggle, but it looks like she left in a hurry." A cold sensation washed over Jonathan. Left? Left for where? Jonathan asked, his heart thudding in his chest. "I don't know yet," Harris replied. "But whatever's going on, she didn't leave on her own terms. I'll keep digging. In the meantime, you better start asking questions." Jonathan's grip tightened on the phone as Harris hung up. Questions? But to whom? He had only one lead, the note. And the she it referenced was the woman he had shared his life with for the past 10 years. Jonathan's gaze shifted toward the door where Amelia had exited hours ago. If Amelia held the answers to Lily's disappearance, it meant Jonathan was standing at the edge of something far darker than he had ever imagined. Jonathan sat at his desk, staring at the sleek, modern lines of his office, but his mind was miles away. Lily's disappearance had lodged itself like a splinter in his thoughts, a growing sense of unease he couldn't shake. The note, "She knows," kept replaying in his mind. The she Lily had referred to could only be Amelia, but what did Amelia know? And why would it be enough for Lily to vanish? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. It was Detective Harris again. "No updates yet," Harris said, his voice gruff as always. "I've got my team looking into her phone records and security footage around her apartment. If she made any calls or left clues, we'll find them." "Thanks," Jonathan replied, though the words felt hollow. Hanging up, he leaned back, trying to recall anything from the past few days that could explain this. Lily had been her usual calm, efficient self, no sign of distress or fear. Why hadn't she come to him directly if something was wrong? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Amelia stepped inside, dressed impeccably as always, her dark hair pulled back into a perfect chignon. There was a slight frown on her face, a trace of concern in her eyes. "Jonathan, you look pale. You've been cooped up in here all day. Are you all right?" He forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind." Amelia moved closer, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "Anything I can help with?" Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet, like honey laced with something dangerous. "You seem distracted." Jonathan's gaze flicked toward her, assessing. For years, Amelia had been a model wife, graceful, charming, and a perfect partner for his public image. But underneath the surface, there was always a layer of distance, as if she existed in a world just out of his reach. And now, more than ever, he felt that gap between them growing. "You wouldn't know anything about Lily, would you?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "She didn't show up today." Amelia's expression didn't falter, though something flickered behind her eyes, just for a moment. She quickly masked it with a practiced smile. "Lily? No, I haven't seen her. Is she all right?" Jonathan shrugged, trying not to reveal the rising tension in his chest. "I'm not sure. She left suddenly, and no one's heard from her. It's strange for her." Amelia's face remained calm, but her fingers played nervously with the strap of her designer handbag. "I'm sure it's nothing serious. Maybe she needed a break." She hesitated, as if choosing her next words carefully. "She was always working long hours. You know how devoted she is. Maybe she just needed some time to herself." Jonathan nodded, but inside, his mind was racing. Lily wasn't the type to disappear without explanation, and the way Amelia so easily dismissed her absence, suggesting she needed time, only deepened his suspicion. Was she trying to cover something up? And if so, how much did she really know? After a brief silence, Amelia's expression softened, her eyes locking with his. "Jonathan, I know you've been under a lot of stress. The business, everything." She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "If you need to talk, I'm here." He felt the weight of her hand, but it only made him feel more disconnected from her. The woman standing in front of him, his wife, suddenly felt like a stranger. He couldn't stop wondering if she was involved in something darker than he could imagine. Forcing a smile, he placed his hand over hers. "Thanks. I appreciate it." Amelia nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she stepped back. "I'll leave you to it then. Just don't work yourself too hard. We've got the charity gala coming up. Don't forget." He nodded absent-mindedly as she turned and left the room, the soft click of the door closing behind her. Jonathan exhaled deeply, the tension returning tenfold. What had that flicker in her eyes meant? She was a master at keeping her emotions under control, but for just a moment, he had seen something. Something she didn't want him to see. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. A text from Detective Harris. "I think you'll want to see this. Come by my office." An hour later, Jonathan found himself sitting across from Harris in a small, dimly lit office that reeked of stale coffee and cigarettes. The detective leaned back in his chair, flipping through a series of photos before sliding one across the table toward Jonathan. It was grainy, clearly taken from a security camera outside Lily's apartment building. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. In the photo, Lily was getting into a black SUV. But what made Jonathan's heart skip a beat was the figure standing next to the car. It was Amelia. "I don't know what your wife was doing there," Harris said, his voice low, "but this was the last time Lily was seen." Jonathan's stomach turned. There it was, the connection he had feared. Amelia had been the last person to see Lily before she disappeared. He stared at the photo, his mind racing. Amelia had lied. She had claimed not to have seen Lily in days, but here she was, on camera, 2 nights before. What were they talking about? Was Amelia involved in whatever Lily had been trying to expose? Was she responsible for Lily's disappearance? "I don't have enough to make any accusations yet," Harris continued, eyeing Jonathan carefully. "But whatever's going on, it's big. I'll keep digging, but you should be careful. If your wife's involved, this could get messy." Jonathan barely heard him. His heart was pounding, his thoughts a blur. The woman he had married, trusted, shared a life with, could she really be capable of this? And then, another question hit him with force. What had Lily known? And how much danger was she in because of it? Jonathan left Harris's office, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Amelia was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had made Lily disappear. But he wasn't about to wait for the police to connect the dots. It was time to confront Amelia. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Jonathan Ashford's car roared to life as he sped through the busy streets, his mind whirling with a mixture of anger, confusion, and fear. Amelia had lied to him. The image of her standing next to Lily in that grainy photo replayed in his mind like a broken record. She had been the last person to see his trusted assistant before she vanished. But why? What did Amelia know that was so dangerous it forced Lily to disappear? He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The thought of confronting Amelia sent chills down his spine. She was an expert at manipulating situations, a woman who could charm her way out of anything. But not this time. Jonathan needed answers, and he wasn't leaving their house without them. As his mansion came into view, the towering gates slid open automatically, welcoming him into the carefully manicured grounds. But the beauty of the estate, once a source of pride, now felt like a cage. His life, his wealth, his marriage, everything felt like a lie. Jonathan pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine with a sharp twist. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying the tension coursing through him. He stepped out of the car and took a deep breath before heading inside. The grand foyer was as immaculate as ever, the marble floors gleaming under the chandelier's soft glow. A staff member walked by, offering a polite nod, but Jonathan barely noticed. His focus was singular, Amelia. He found her in the sitting room, casually sipping tea, a luxury magazine spread out in front of her. The image was surreal, so normal, so detached from the chaos Jonathan felt inside. She looked up as he entered, her smile warm, as if she hadn't just been caught in a lie. "Jonathan, you're home early," she said sweetly, setting down her cup. "How was your day?" He stood there, staring at her, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. His throat felt tight, the words clawing their way up. For a moment, he simply watched her, marveling at how easily she could mask whatever secrets she was hiding. But Jonathan wasn't going to play this game anymore. "Where is she, Amelia?" His voice came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. Amelia blinked, her smile fading. "I'm sorry, what?" "Lily." The name hung in the air like a challenge. "Where is she?" Amelia's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or fear. But she quickly recovered, feigning innocence. "Jonathan, what are you talking about? Lily's your assistant, isn't she? Why would I know where she is?" Jonathan stepped closer, his patience eroding. "Don't play dumb with me, Amelia. I know you were with her 2 nights ago. You were the last person to see her before she disappeared." Amelia's face remained calm, though her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair a little too tightly. "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen Lily in days." Jonathan pulled the photo from his pocket and thrust it toward her. "Explain this," he demanded. Amelia glanced at the image, her expression carefully controlled, but Jonathan didn't miss the slight tremble in her hand. She set the photo aside, exhaling slowly as if trying to decide her next move. "All right," she said, her voice measured. "I did meet her." Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. "Why? Why would you lie to me about something like this?" Amelia stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress as if the conversation were merely an inconvenience. "Jonathan, I wasn't hiding anything. I didn't mention it because it wasn't important." "Not important?" His voice rose, disbelief flooding him. "She's missing, Amelia. She left me a note that said, 'She knows.'" "Was she talking about you?" Amelia's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening at his words. For a moment, she said nothing, the silence thick with unspoken tension. Jonathan could feel it, the walls of their marriage crumbling in real time. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower, colder. "Lily came to me because she had concerns about our marriage." "Our marriage?" Jonathan's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Amelia stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. She was nosy. She had started asking questions, trying to dig into our private life, into things that had nothing to do with her. "She crossed a line, Jonathan." "What kind of questions?" Jonathan pressed, his pulse quickening. Amelia sighed, as though the weight of it all had finally caught up to her. "She started looking into my past. She thought she could find something to use against me. She thought you should know." "Know what?" Jonathan demanded, his frustration boiling over. "What the hell are you hiding, Amelia?" For the first time, Amelia's composure cracked. Her eyes flashed with anger, a fire igniting behind the cold mask she had worn for so long. "You want to know? Fine, Jonathan. You want the truth? I'm not the person you think I am. My past is complicated. But Lily didn't know what she was getting herself into when she started digging. I tried to warn her to stop." "Warn her?" Jonathan repeated, disbelief coursing through him. "You mean threaten her?" Amelia's eyes narrowed. "I didn't threaten her. I just told her to back off, for her own good. But she wouldn't listen." Jonathan's heart pounded as the pieces began to fall into place. Lily had found something dangerous enough to make Amelia confront her. But what had she uncovered? And why would it be enough to make her disappear? "You're lying," Jonathan said, his voice low and dangerous. "You know more than you're telling me." "Where is she, Amelia?" Amelia's expression turned icy. "I don't know where she is. But if she's smart, she's staying far away. Because once she opened that door into my past, she stepped into something she can't get out of." Jonathan's blood ran cold. The woman standing in front of him wasn't just hiding a secret, she was dangerous. Before he could respond, a knock on the door interrupted them. A staff member entered, looking nervous. "Excuse me, sir. There's a man here to see you. He says it's urgent." Jonathan turned, still reeling from the conversation with Amelia. "Who is it?" The staff member hesitated. "He says his name is Vincent Blackwell." The name sent a shock through Jonathan. Vincent Blackwell, the man who had been his fiercest rival for years. What the hell was he doing here? Without another word, Jonathan left the room, his mind spinning. Amelia's lies, Lily's disappearance, and now Vincent Blackwell showing up unannounced. It was all connected. And somehow, The truth was buried beneath layers of deception. As Jonathan walked toward the entrance, one thing was clear. His life was unraveling faster than he could control, and the answers he was seeking were darker than he could have ever imagined. Jonathan's footsteps echoed down the long corridor as he made his way to the entrance hall, each step weighted with a growing sense of dread. Vincent Blackwell, his longtime business rival, showing up out of the blue was a twist he hadn't expected. The mere mention of Vincent's name stirred memories of ruthless negotiations, bitter confrontations, and an unspoken rivalry that had spanned a decade. Vincent didn't just drop by without an agenda. Whatever brought him here, Jonathan knew it wasn't good. As he reached the entrance, the heavy wooden doors swung open, and there stood Vincent, impeccably dressed as always, with that same arrogant smirk on his face. His presence exuded the kind of calm confidence that came from years of navigating the treacherous world of high-stakes business. But today, there was something else in his eyes, something darker, more calculated. "Jonathan," Vincent greeted him smoothly, stepping into the foyer like he owned the place. "We need to talk." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "If this is about business, Vincent, I'm not interested. Now isn't the time." Vincent smiled, a thin, cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Oh, it's not about business. At least, not in the way you're thinking." Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. The last thing he wanted was more mind games, especially after his confrontation with Amelia. "Get to the point," he demanded, crossing his arms. "What are you doing here?" Vincent's gaze swept the grand interior of the mansion, as though he was savoring the moment. "I'm here because of Amelia," he said slowly, each word dripping with purpose. Jonathan froze, his breath catching in his throat. Amelia. Just hearing her name from Vincent's lips filled him with unease. He took a step forward, his voice low and threatening. "What do you know about Amelia?" Vincent's smirk widened. "More than you think. But let's not pretend, Jonathan. You've always been good at reading between the lines, haven't you?" "Stop playing games, Vincent," Jonathan snapped, his patience unraveling. "Tell me what you know, or get out." Vincent raised his hands in mock surrender, clearly enjoying himself. All right, I'll get to the point." His expression darkened, and the playful tone vanished, replaced with something more serious. "Your wife has been working with me. For years." Jonathan's world seemed to tilt for a moment. He stared at Vincent, the words echoing in his head. Working with him? His mind raced, trying to process what he had just heard. "You're lying," Jonathan said, his voice hard, but deep down, he knew Vincent wasn't the kind to come here without proof. "Amelia would never." "Oh, but she would," Vincent interrupted, taking a step closer. His voice lowered as though delivering a well-kept secret. "In fact, she's been feeding me information about your business, your deals, for quite some time. How do you think I've managed to stay one step ahead all these years?" Jonathan clenched his fists at his sides, anger and disbelief swirling inside him. It couldn't be true. Amelia had never shown interest in his business, never asked questions. She had always seemed distant from that part of his life. And yet, the subtle betrayals over the years, the deals that had fallen through, the plans that had been leaked, it all started to make a sick kind of sense. "You're full of it, Vincent," Jonathan said, though his voice lacked the confidence he wanted it to have. "Amelia wouldn't betray me like that." Vincent shrugged, unbothered by Jonathan's denial. "Believe what you want, but ask yourself this. How much do you really know about your wife? Do you know where she was before she met you? Who she was?" Jonathan's stomach twisted as he recalled his earlier conversation with Amelia. The way she had evaded his questions about Lily, the way she had admitted that her past wasn't what it seemed. Had Vincent been involved in whatever secrets she was keeping? "What does Lily have to do with this?" Jonathan demanded, his voice sharp. "She found something, didn't she?" Vincent's eyes gleamed with a hint of amusement. "Ah, Lily. Yes, she got too close to the truth, didn't she? It's a shame, really. I always thought she was smart, but she got in over her head." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, got in over her head? Where is she, Vincent?" Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying Jonathan's panic. I don't know where she is now, Jonathan, but I do know she discovered something that made your dear wife very nervous. Amelia came to me, worried about what Lily might expose. We had to handle the situation before things got out of control. Handle the situation? Jonathan's voice trembled with rage. What the hell does that mean? It means, Vincent said calmly, that if you don't start asking the right questions, you might never see Lily again. Jonathan lunged forward, grabbing Vincent by the collar, his anger finally boiling over. If you've hurt her. Vincent didn't flinch. He smiled calmly, his cool composure only fueling Jonathan's rage. Easy, Jonathan. I haven't laid a finger on her. But Amelia? Well, I can't speak for what she's capable of when she feels threatened. Jonathan released him, his mind spinning. Amelia and Vincent, working together all this time. His wife had been betraying him, playing him for a fool while feeding information to his greatest rival. And now, Lily had disappeared because she had uncovered the truth. Vincent straightened his collar, unaffected by the outburst. I'm not your enemy here, Jonathan, he said smoothly. In fact, I'm the one who's giving you a chance to get ahead of this. If you want to know the truth, you need to start looking into Amelia's past. And you need to act fast. Jonathan's hands trembled as he turned away, barely able to process the magnitude of the betrayal. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing everything about the people closest to him. But now, the foundation of his life, his marriage, his business, his trust in Amelia, was collapsing. What do you want from me? Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vincent smiled again, that cold, calculated look in his eyes. I want nothing from you, Jonathan. I just want to see how this all plays out. Consider this a friendly heads-up. With that, Vincent turned and walked out of the mansion, leaving Jonathan standing in the foyer, his world shattered. Back in his office, Jonathan sat in stunned silence. He could barely comprehend the situation he was now entangled in. The love of his life, the woman he thought he knew, had been working with his most dangerous rival, orchestrating his downfall. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as his mind raced. He needed to find out more about Amelia's past, about the truth behind her connection to Vincent. He needed to know what Lily had uncovered and where she had gone. As he stared out the window into the darkening evening, Jonathan knew there was only one person who might have the answers he needed. A man he hadn't spoken to in years, but who had helped him dig deep into the lives of others in the past. His old private investigator. Jonathan picked up the phone, his voice steady but cold. Thomas Miller? It's Jonathan Ashford. I need your help. It's urgent. Jonathan sat in his office, the silence around him almost oppressive as he waited for the call to connect. The drink in his hand felt heavy, like the weight of everything that had crashed down on him in the past few hours. Betrayed by his wife, deceived by his closest partner. And now, Lily, the one person who had always been honest with him, was missing because she had gotten too close to the truth. The truth that Amelia, his wife, had been working with his greatest rival, Vincent Blackwell, for years. The phone clicked, and a gruff voice cut through the line. Thomas Miller speaking. Jonathan exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. Thomas, it's Jonathan Ashford. A pause, then a low chuckle. Well, if it isn't Jonathan Ashford. It's been a long time since I've heard from you. What's the occasion? Looking to ruin another competitor? Not this time, Jonathan said, his voice tight with tension. I need your help, Thomas. This is personal. The tone on the other end shifted, growing serious. Personal? Must be serious if you're calling me. What's going on? Jonathan glanced around the office, as if expecting someone to be eavesdropping, even though he was alone. I need you to look into my wife. There are things she's been hiding from me, things I should have seen a long time ago, but I didn't. Thomas didn't miss a beat. Amelia, huh? What's she been up to? She's been feeding information to Vincent Blackwell, Jonathan said through gritted teeth. For years. I found out today that they've been working together behind my back. She's been leaking details of my business deals, sabotaging everything I've built. Thomas let out a low whistle. That's cold. And here I thought you had the perfect power couple image going. Jonathan ignored the remark. It's worse than that. My assistant, Lily. She found out something. She was looking into Amelia's past, and now she's missing. There was a long silence on the other end. Lily Caldwell? The same one who's been working with you for years. Yes, Jonathan confirmed. She left me a note saying, she knows. And then she vanished. Amelia lied about not seeing her, but I found out they met 2 nights ago. Whatever Lily discovered, it scared Amelia enough to take drastic action. Thomas exhaled deeply. Sounds like you've got yourself into one hell of a mess, Jonathan. I'll start looking into Amelia's past. If there's anything there, I'll find it. Do it quickly, Jonathan urged, and find out everything you can about her connection to Vincent Blackwell. I want to know how deep this goes. Consider it done, Thomas replied, his voice steady. But listen, if Amelia's involved in something this dangerous, you need to be careful. People like Vincent don't play games. They don't leave loose ends. Jonathan's grip on the phone tightened. I'm already in too deep, Thomas. Just get me the information, and I'll handle the rest. After the call ended, Jonathan sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The thought of Amelia working with Vincent Blackwell for years made him sick to his stomach. What else had she lied about? Their marriage had always been one of convenience, a merger of 2 powerful names. But he had believed they had something more. Now he wasn't sure. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. A text from Detective Harris. We found something. Come to my office. Jonathan grabbed his keys, a sense of urgency pushing him forward. If Harris had found anything related to Lily, it could be the key to unraveling everything. He needed to know what had happened to her, and fast. Detective Harris's office was dimly lit when Jonathan arrived, the blinds partially drawn against the late afternoon sun. The walls were lined with old case files and faded photos of crime scenes, a stark reminder of the detective's long history of chasing dangerous people. Harris was seated behind his cluttered desk, rifling through a stack of papers. He barely looked up when Jonathan entered, his attention fixed on a single document. You're here, Harris said, setting the paper down. Good. I've been looking into Lily's phone records and her recent movements. Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. Did you find anything? Harris nodded, his face grim. Lily made a series of calls before she disappeared, one of them to a burner phone. I traced the number, and it belongs to someone tied to Vincent Blackwell's inner circle. She was in contact with him. Jonathan's stomach twisted. Vincent's involved in this? It looks that way, Harris replied. But that's not all. We pulled surveillance footage from the building where Lily was last seen. There was a black SUV parked nearby, one registered under an alias that we've tied back to Amelia. Jonathan felt a cold chill creep over him. His wife had been using aliases, working in the shadows. It was worse than he thought. So Amelia was directly involved, Jonathan muttered, running a hand through his hair. She knew about Lily. She must have done something to silence her. Harris leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. That's not the only thing. We found something in Lily's apartment. It was hidden, tucked away in a drawer like she didn't want anyone to find it. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small envelope. This. Jonathan took the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. He opened it carefully, pulling out a photograph. A grainy picture of a woman, her back turned, walking with a young girl. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the woman instantly. It was Amelia. The girl, though, Jonathan had never seen her before. Who is this? Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harris leaned back, folding his arms. That's what we need to figure out. From what I can tell, that photo was taken about 20 years ago. It looks like Amelia was with that girl somewhere far from here. Maybe Europe. But the girl, she's not listed in any of Amelia's known records. It's like she doesn't exist. Jonathan stared at the photo, a sickening realization forming in the pit of his stomach. Amelia had been living a double life, hiding secrets that stretched back decades. Who was this girl? And what connection did she have to the dangerous web of lies Amelia had woven? Harris's voice cut through his thoughts. Jonathan, I'm going to be honest with you. Whatever Amelia's involved in, it goes deep. You need to be careful. This could blow up in ways you don't want to imagine. Jonathan nodded, though his mind was spinning. Everything he thought he knew about his wife was falling apart. There was only one way to find out the truth. I need to confront her, Jonathan said, his voice firm. I need to know what she's hiding. Harris raised an eyebrow. That's a dangerous move, Jonathan. She's already lied to you. If you push her too hard, she could go underground, disappear, just like Lily. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I don't have a choice. If Amelia's involved in this, if she's hiding something about this girl, I need to know. Lily is missing because of it. Harris sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. All right, but if you're going to confront her, do it smart. Don't let her know you're onto her just yet. Gather as much information as you can before you make a move. Jonathan stood, the photograph still clutched in his hand. I'll be careful. But as he left Harris's office, Jonathan knew the time for caution was running out. The web of lies was unraveling, and at the center of it was Amelia, and possibly this mysterious girl. He had to confront her, and this time, there would be no more secrets. Jonathan drove back to his mansion in a daze, the photograph of Amelia and the mysterious girl resting on the passenger seat beside him. His mind buzzed with questions that had no answers. Who was the girl? Why had Amelia hidden her existence for all these years? The sick feeling in Jonathan's stomach only grew with each passing moment, knowing that whatever secrets his wife was keeping, they had led to Lily's disappearance, and possibly something worse. As the towering gates of his estate loomed ahead, Jonathan clenched his jaw. Confronting Amelia was a dangerous move, especially now that he knew the extent of her deception. But there was no going back. He needed answers. Inside the mansion, the oppressive silence seemed louder than ever. The house staff moved discreetly in the background, their eyes averted, as if they could sense the growing tension. Jonathan walked swiftly through the grand hallways until he reached the living room where Amelia often spent her afternoons. Sure enough, she was there, reclining on one of the luxurious sofas, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up, her gaze meeting his, and for a moment, something like surprise flashed in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual calm composure. Jonathan, she greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Back so soon? I thought you'd be in the office all day. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his gaze fixed on her every move. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the certainty that this conversation would change everything. I went to see Detective Harris today, he began, his voice low, yet carrying a weight that filled the room. Amelia raised an eyebrow, still maintaining her poised demeanor. Oh, has he found anything about Lily? He ignored the question and pulled the photograph from his pocket, holding it up for her to see. Recognize this? Amelia's expression faltered. Her eyes widened just slightly, enough for Jonathan to see the crack in her mask. She stared at the picture for a beat too long before responding, her voice tight. Where did you get that? Jonathan's heart raced. Got her. You didn't answer the question, he said, stepping closer. His voice was cold, calculated. He wanted to watch her squirm. Who is this girl? And why is she with you? Amelia stood slowly, setting her wine glass down with care, her movements deliberate. She met his gaze with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. Jonathan, you don't know what you're getting into. His blood boiled at her deflection. Who is she, Amelia? His voice was sharp now, demanding. Amelia's jaw tightened, but she remained composed, her eyes never leaving his. She was someone from a long time ago. Before you, before this life. She took a breath, her voice softer now. It's not what you think. Jonathan took another step toward her, his grip tightening around the photograph. Then tell me what it is. Tell me the truth for once, because I'm done with your lies. There was a flicker of something. Fear, regret, perhaps, across Amelia's face, but she quickly buried it. She turned away from him, pacing to the far side of the room, her hands trembling slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, strained. Her name was Sophie, Amelia admitted, her back still to him. She was my daughter. Jonathan froze, his mind struggling to process her words. Daughter? The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet as he stared at the woman he had been married to for nearly a decade, realizing he knew almost nothing about her past. "You have a daughter?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You never told me about her. You never even mentioned." "She's gone," Amelia interrupted, her voice laced with sorrow. "She's been gone for 20 years. Jonathan's heart raced as he tried to make sense of it all. "What do you mean, gone? What happened to her?" Amelia turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She was kidnapped when she was 8. I searched for her, did everything I could to find her, but nothing. She disappeared without a trace." Her voice broke slightly, and for a moment, Jonathan saw real pain there, a crack in the icy, perfect facade she'd always worn. He felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly drowned out by the questions flooding his mind. "Why didn't you ever tell me this? Why did you keep her a secret?" Amelia swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Because that part of my life was over. I didn't want to relive it, and I didn't think it mattered anymore." She shook her head. "And when I met you, I wanted to start fresh, to leave all that pain behind." Jonathan stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a suffocating blanket. But one question still burned in his mind. What does Sophie have to do with Lily? Amelia's eyes snapped up to meet his, and there it was, the flicker of fear again. She hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully. "Lily was getting too close," Amelia finally admitted. "She found out about Sophie, started digging into her disappearance, trying to piece together what happened. She didn't know how dangerous it was. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't stop." "Warn her?" Jonathan's voice rose. "Amelia, what aren't you telling me?" Amelia took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Sophie's kidnapping, it wasn't random. It was part of something much bigger. And the people involved, people like Vincent, they won't let anyone get too close to the truth." Jonathan felt his stomach drop. The implications of her words hit him like a tidal wave. "Vincent?" he repeated, his voice tight with disbelief. "You're telling me Vincent was involved in your daughter's kidnapping?" Amelia nodded, her expression haunted. "I didn't know it at first, but when I started working with him, I realized he had been part of the same group that took her. I thought if I worked with him, I could find out where Sophie was. But it never worked. And now—" Jonathan stepped forward, his anger boiling over. "And now Lily's missing because of this? Because you dragged her into this mess?" "I didn't drag her into anything." Amelia snapped, her voice cracking. She wouldn't stop. She kept digging, asking questions. "I tried to protect her, but it was too late." Jonathan's head spun, the web of lies and betrayal becoming too much to bear. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of secrets, each one more dangerous than the last. But one thing was clear. Lily had stumbled onto something far more sinister than he could have imagined. And now, she was in danger because of it. Jonathan's mind raced. He had to find her before it was too late. But with Vincent involved, he knew this wasn't going to be easy. Vincent played dirty, and if he had anything to do with Sophie's kidnapping, Jonathan was up against a man who had been manipulating him for years. "You're going to help me find Lily," Jonathan said, his voice cold and determined. "And then you're going to tell me everything, about Sophie, about Vincent, about all of it." Amelia looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "I will," she whispered. "But Jonathan, you have to understand. Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. These people, they won't stop." "I don't care," Jonathan said, his voice steely. "I'm going to save Lily, and then I'm going to take Vincent down." Jonathan's heart raced as he left Amelia standing alone in the living room, her cryptic warnings still echoing in his mind. He could barely process what she had revealed. Sophie, her secret daughter, kidnapped decades ago and somehow connected to Vincent Blackwell, the man who had been manipulating him all these years. But what struck him hardest was the chilling realization that Lily had uncovered this dark truth, and now her life was in danger. Jonathan stormed into his study, slamming the door behind him. His mind was a whirlwind of rage and confusion. For years, Amelia had been living a double life, working with Vincent under the guise of finding Sophie. But the truth had only led them into deeper darkness. And now Lily, His trusted assistant, the one person who had never lied to him, was missing because of it. He needed to find her. Fast. Jonathan grabbed his phone and dialed Detective Harris, his hands shaking with urgency. The phone rang once, then twice before Harris answered. "Harris, it's Jonathan," he said, his voice strained with tension. "I know who's behind Lily's disappearance. It's Vincent Blackwell. He's been involved in all of this." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Vincent Blackwell?" Harris repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. "You're telling me your wife and Vincent are working together?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Yes. Amelia's been involved with him for years. And it all ties back to Sophie, her daughter. She was kidnapped when she was 8. Vincent was involved, and now they're covering it up. Lily found out about it, and they made her disappear." Harris let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Jonathan, this is bigger than I thought." "I need you to help me find Lily," Jonathan pressed. "She's in danger, and if we don't act fast, Vincent will get rid of her, just like he did with Sophie." Harris's voice became serious. "All right, I'll put more men on it. We'll comb through every lead we have on Vincent. But if he's involved in something this big, you'd better be prepared. This isn't just a missing persons case anymore." Jonathan hung up, his chest heaving with frustration. He couldn't wait for the police to act. He needed to take matters into his own hands. Vincent was dangerous, and every second that passed put Lily's life at greater risk. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Harris. It was a message from Thomas Miller, the private investigator he had called earlier. Jonathan opened it, his pulse quickening as he read the text. "I found something. Meet me at the docks, Warehouse 23. Come alone." Jonathan's stomach twisted with a mix of fear and determination. The docks were one of Vincent's many fronts for illegal operations. If Thomas had found something, it could be his best chance at getting to the truth, and to Lily. He didn't waste any time. Throwing on a jacket, Jonathan grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. As he stepped out of the mansion, the cold night air hit him like a slap in the face. The sky was dark, thick with clouds, and the distant hum of the city felt far away from the storm brewing in his life. The drive to the docks felt longer than it was, his mind swirling with the weight of everything he had learned. Amelia's betrayal, the disappearance of Sophie, and the looming threat of Vincent's network. He knew that by walking into this confrontation, he was diving headfirst into dangerous territory. But there was no turning back now. When Jonathan arrived at the docks, the air was thick with the salty scent of the sea, and the wind whipped through the narrow alleys between towering containers. Warehouse 23 stood at the end of a row of rusted buildings, its exterior worn and weathered, but the faint glow of light from within suggested that it wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. Jonathan parked the car and stepped out, his breath visible in the cold night air. His senses were heightened, every sound, the creak of metal, the distant echo of water lapping against the dock, making him hyper-aware of his surroundings. He walked cautiously toward the warehouse, the weight of what he might find pressing down on him. As he reached the door, he hesitated for a split second, his hand hovering over the handle. Was this a trap? Could Thomas really be trusted? But there was no time for doubt. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, rows of shipping containers casting long shadows across the concrete floor. In the center of the room, a single light hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh glow over the figure standing beneath it. It was Thomas. "Jonathan," Thomas greeted him, his face etched with concern. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Jonathan stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "What did you find?" Thomas gestured to a table beside him, where a stack of documents and photos lay scattered. "I've been digging into Vincent's operations and Amelia's past. It's worse than you think." Jonathan scanned the documents quickly. There were bank statements, offshore accounts, and connections between Vincent's business empire and a shadowy network of traffickers. His eyes widened as he saw the names of prominent figures, businessmen, politicians, who were all somehow tied to Vincent's web. "He's been using his business as a front for human trafficking," Thomas explained grimly. "And Sophie, Amelia's daughter, was one of his earliest victims." Jonathan's blood ran cold. His hands shook as he flipped through the papers. This is how he's been able to stay ahead of me all these years, Jonathan muttered, realization dawning on him. He's been pulling strings behind the scenes, manipulating everything. Thomas nodded. And Lily, she must have found out. She was getting too close to the truth. That's why they took her. Jonathan's heart raced as he pieced it all together. Vincent had used Sophie's kidnapping as leverage over Amelia, forcing her to work with him. And now, Lily, who had been uncovering Vincent's darkest secrets, had become the next target. Where is she? Jonathan demanded, his voice sharp with desperation. Where's Lily? Thomas looked at him, his expression grim. I don't know yet, but I found out that Vincent has been using a safe house just outside the city. It's where he takes people when he wants them to disappear. Jonathan's pulse quickened. A safe house. It was his best chance to find her. I need to go there, Jonathan said, his voice filled with urgency. I need to find her before it's too late. Thomas placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. I'll go with you. But you need to be prepared, Jonathan. This isn't just about Lily anymore. Vincent has connections everywhere. If you go up against him, there's no coming back from this. Jonathan looked at the pile of evidence in front of him, proof of Vincent's crimes, of the corruption that had infiltrated every level of power. He thought of Lily, the one person who had always stood by his side, and how she was now in danger because she had tried to protect him. I'm not backing down, Jonathan said, his voice steady. I'm going to take him down, and I'm going to get Lily back. Thomas nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. Then let's end this. As Jonathan and Thomas sped through the dark streets toward Vincent's safe house, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was going to change everything. His entire life had been built on lies. His marriage, his business, his alliances. But now, for the first time in years, Jonathan knew what he had to do. He was going to face Vincent. He was going to uncover the truth. And this time, there would be no more secrets. The car sped through the darkened streets, the distant glow of city lights fading behind them as Jonathan and Thomas drove toward the location of Vincent Blackwell's safe house. The air inside the car was thick with tension. Jonathan's heart pounded with anticipation, his mind replaying every terrible possibility about what could be happening to Lily. The documents Thomas had shown him, the evidence of Vincent's trafficking ring, haunted him. Sophie had been one of his earliest victims, and now Lily was in Vincent's grip, simply for getting too close to the truth. As the city gave way to quiet, desolate roads, Jonathan clenched his fists in his lap. His thoughts drifted back to Amelia. She had been complicit in Vincent's schemes for years, all in a desperate attempt to find her kidnapped daughter. But her silence, her lies, they had led to this. Everything was unraveling, and now Jonathan had only one goal: save Lily and destroy Vincent, no matter the cost. The car's headlights swept over the shadowy outline of an old, abandoned building in the distance. The safe house. It was tucked away off a secluded road, surrounded by dense trees that made it nearly invisible in the night. Thomas slowed the car as they approached the perimeter, turning off the lights. We don't know what we're walking into, he warned. Vincent could have men posted inside. If he's got Lily here, she'll be heavily guarded. Jonathan nodded grimly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His pulse quickened as adrenaline pumped through his veins. He had come this far. There was no turning back. We're getting her out, Jonathan said, his voice firm. Whatever it takes. Thomas opened the glove compartment, pulling out 2 handguns. He handed one to Jonathan, who accepted it without hesitation. Just in case, Thomas said, his voice low. We don't know what we'll find in there. They stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at their skin. The abandoned building loomed in front of them, its windows dark, its structure decaying. Jonathan could feel the danger hanging in the air. Every shadow seemed to shift with the wind, every creak of the trees putting him on edge. Thomas led the way, moving silently as they approached the back entrance. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the dirt underfoot. As they neared the door, Jonathan's hand tightened around the gun, his heart pounding louder with each step. When they reached the door, Thomas crouched down, listening for movement inside. There was nothing but eerie silence. He gestured for Jonathan to follow as he slowly pushed the door open. The inside of the building was just as dark and desolate as the exterior. The faint smell of mildew hung in the air, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb down the hallway. They moved quietly through the narrow corridor, their senses on high alert. Jonathan's mind raced, thoughts of Lily filling every corner of his consciousness. Was she here? Was she still alive? He had to believe that she was, that there was still time to save her. Suddenly, the sound of muffled voices drifted toward them from deeper within the building. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He exchanged a quick glance with Thomas, who nodded silently. They were getting closer. They followed the sound until they reached a large room at the end of the hall. Inside, 3 men stood around a table, talking quietly amongst themselves. The air in the room felt thick with tension, but there was no sign of Lily. "Where's Vincent?" Jonathan whispered to Thomas, his voice barely audible. "He's probably upstairs," Thomas replied, his eyes scanning the room. "But we need to get past these guys first." Jonathan's grip on the gun tightened as he watched the men. He couldn't afford any mistakes. If they raised an alarm, if they alerted Vincent to their presence, it could mean the end for Lily. His mind raced, trying to figure out the best way to approach. But before they could make a move, one of the men spoke up, his voice low but clear. "We need to keep an eye on the girl," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Vincent's orders. No one gets in or out without his say." Jonathan's blood ran cold. The girl. They were talking about Lily. She was here. "We need to move," Jonathan whispered to Thomas, urgency filling his voice. Thomas nodded. "I'll take the 2 on the left. You cover the one near the door." Jonathan's heart pounded in his ears as they prepared to strike. This was it, the moment of truth. With silent precision, they moved into position. Thomas struck first, disarming the 2 men in rapid succession, the dull thuds of bodies hitting the floor barely registering in the tense atmosphere. Jonathan moved quickly, his gun aimed at the 3rd man by the door, who looked up just in time to see the barrel of the weapon pointed at his chest. "Don't make a sound," Jonathan growled, his voice low but dangerous. The man raised his hands, his eyes wide with fear. "Please," he stammered, "I don't want any trouble." "Where's Lily?" Jonathan demanded, his voice steady, but the fury in his eyes unmistakable. "Where is she?" The man swallowed hard, glancing nervously toward the stairs. "Upstairs," he muttered. "2nd floor, last room on the left. She's locked up." Jonathan's heart raced. He motioned for Thomas to keep an eye on the man as he bolted for the stairs, his mind fixated on Lily. The adrenaline surged through him, his footsteps echoing in the silent building as he ascended the stairs 2 at a time. When he reached the 2nd floor, the hallway was dimly lit, the air colder than it had been downstairs. The door to the last room on the left stood slightly ajar, and as Jonathan approached, he heard the faint sound of movement inside. His pulse thundered as he pushed the door open. There, in the corner of the room, bound to a chair, was Lily. Her clothes were dirty, her face bruised, but she was alive. The sight of her hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. "Lily," he whispered, rushing to her side. His hands worked quickly to untie the ropes, and as they fell to the ground, she collapsed into his arms, weak but conscious. "Jonathan," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "I knew you'd come." "I'm getting you out of here," Jonathan said, his voice tight with emotion as he helped her stand. "You're safe now." But before they could take another step, a cold, familiar voice filled the room. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." Jonathan spun around, his heart sinking as he came face to face with Vincent Blackwell. He stood in the doorway, a gun in his hand and a smug smile on his face. His presence filled the room with an almost palpable darkness. "Vincent," Jonathan spat, his body tensing with rage. "You're not walking out of here." Vincent's smile only widened. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Jonathan. You're out of your league. You always have been." Jonathan's blood boiled, his mind racing. He had to think fast. Lily's life, his own, everything depended on what happened next. "You're done," Jonathan said through clenched teeth, stepping forward. "I know everything. About Sophie. About the trafficking. You won't get away with this." Vincent's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing dangerously. You think you're in control here, Jonathan? You think you can take me down? He took a step closer, his gun aimed directly at Jonathan. You're nothing. Everything you've built, everything you care about, it's all mine now. But before Vincent could pull the trigger, the sound of a gunshot rang out. Vincent staggered back, a look of shock crossing his face as he dropped to his knees, clutching his side. Behind him, Thomas stood in the doorway, his gun smoking, his eyes cold. "It's over," Thomas said, his voice low. Vincent fell to the ground, unconscious, as blood pooled around him. Jonathan exhaled sharply, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He turned to Lily, who was shaking but still standing. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "It's over," he whispered, though the words felt heavy. The battle might have been won, but the war was far from over. The room felt heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation. Vincent Blackwell lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood slowly expanding beneath him. Thomas stood by the door, his gun still smoking, eyes scanning the scene to make sure the threat was truly neutralized. Jonathan held Lily tightly, feeling the adrenaline course through his veins, though the reality of the situation hadn't fully settled in yet. "Is he dead?" Jonathan asked, his voice low and tense as he glanced at Vincent's body. Thomas crouched down, checking for a pulse before standing up. "He's alive, but not for long if we don't get out of here. His men will be back soon." Jonathan nodded, his grip tightening around Lily. She was weak, bruised, but conscious. As he helped her to her feet, the weight of everything that had happened crashed down on him. Vincent, the man who had orchestrated so much pain and destruction, was finally down. But the threat wasn't over yet. His network was still out there, and Vincent's empire wouldn't crumble overnight. "Lily," Jonathan said softly, his voice filled with relief. "Can you walk?" Lily nodded weakly, leaning on him for support. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "But we need to go. Now." Thomas moved toward the door, peeking into the hallway to make sure the coast was clear. "We don't have much time. Vincent's people will realize something's wrong soon. We need to get out before they surround the building." Jonathan, with Lily leaning on him, followed Thomas down the stairs. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the earlier confrontation still lingering in the air. But they knew it wouldn't last. Vincent's men were out there, and they wouldn't let Jonathan, Lily, or Thomas escape without a fight. As they made their way toward the exit, the sound of distant voices reached their ears. Jonathan's heart raced. They were closing in. "Go!" Thomas hissed, picking up the pace. "We need to make it to the car before they see us." They burst through the back door into the cold night air, Jonathan's grip on Lily never loosening. The car was only a few yards away, but the sound of footsteps behind them made Jonathan's blood run cold. Vincent's men were getting closer. "Get in," Thomas shouted as he opened the car door. Jonathan helped Lily into the back seat, then jumped into the passenger seat as Thomas started the engine. Just as the car roared to life, a group of men appeared from the side of the warehouse, shouting and pointing toward them. "Go, go, go!" Jonathan yelled. Thomas slammed on the gas, the car screeching out of the lot and onto the narrow, winding road. Gunshots rang out behind them, bullets pinging off the car's frame. But they were too far ahead for Vincent's men to land a solid hit. The car sped through the dark countryside, the tension inside the vehicle thick. Jonathan glanced back at Lily, her head resting against the seat, eyes half closed. "Hang in there, Lily," he said softly. "We're almost out." She gave a weak nod, her eyes fluttering open briefly. "Thank you," she murmured, "for coming for me." Jonathan's chest tightened at her words. He hadn't just come to save her. He had come because he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Lily had been more than just an assistant to him. She had been the only constant in his life, the only person he trusted implicitly. And now, seeing her like this, bruised and broken, made him realize just how deeply he cared for her. Thomas kept his focus on the road, his jaw clenched. "We need to find somewhere safe to regroup," he said. "Vincent's network is extensive. Just because we've taken him down doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet." Jonathan knew he was right. Vincent might be incapacitated, but his empire was far-reaching, And there were still powerful people involved in his trafficking ring, people who wouldn't hesitate to come after them. They needed a plan, and fast. "There's a safe house," Jonathan said suddenly, the idea forming in his mind. "It's an old property outside the city. My father used to own it. It's off the grid. No one will think to look for us there." Thomas nodded. "That'll buy us some time. But we'll need to make sure we're not followed." Jonathan pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Harris. After a few rings, Harris answered, his voice sharp and focused. "Ashford, what's happening?" "We have Lily," Jonathan said quickly. "She's safe, but Vincent is down. He's not dead yet, but his men are still out there. We're heading to a safe house outside the city, but I need backup." "Understood," Harris replied. "I'll send units to cover you. But be careful, Vincent's network is bigger than we thought. He's connected to a lot of dangerous people." Jonathan hung up, feeling a flicker of hope. At least Harris was on their side, and with the police involved, they had a chance of getting out of this alive. The drive to the safe house felt endless, but finally, they reached the isolated property. The house was old but sturdy, hidden away behind thick trees and a long, winding driveway that made it nearly impossible to spot from the main road. Jonathan hadn't been there in years, but the memories of his father's secretive life came flooding back as they pulled up. They helped Lily inside, settling her on one of the couches in the large, dimly lit living room. She winced as she adjusted herself, her injuries more painful now that the adrenaline had worn off. "Rest," Jonathan said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe now." Lily nodded weakly, her eyes closing as exhaustion overtook her. Jonathan watched her for a moment longer, his heart aching with everything she had been through. She was brave, braver than he had ever realized. She had risked her life to uncover the truth, and now he had to finish what she started. Thomas stood by the window, peering through the curtains at the darkened forest beyond. "We can't stay here for long," he said quietly. "Vincent's people will come looking for us, and they won't stop until they find him, or us." Jonathan nodded, his mind racing. The battle with Vincent wasn't over. He was still alive, and as long as he had power, he would continue to be a threat. The trafficking network, the corruption, everything Vincent had built was still out there, waiting to strike back. Jonathan knew there was only one way to truly end this. "We're going to take him down," he said, his voice filled with determination. "For good." Thomas turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "We expose everything," Jonathan replied, his mind already formulating the plan. "We take the evidence we've gathered, Vincent's trafficking ring, the corruption, his connections, and we take it public. We release it to the media, to law enforcement. We blow the whole thing wide open." Thomas looked at him skeptically. "That's a dangerous move. If we do that, you're painting a target on your back and on Lily's. Are you ready for that?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice. Vincent's empire has thrived in the shadows for too long. If we don't bring it into the light, it'll never end. And more people, innocent people, will get hurt." Thomas was silent for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. It was risky, dangerous, even, but it was the only way to finally bring down Vincent's reign of terror. As they prepared to make their next move, Jonathan glanced back at Lily, who was now fast asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. He would protect her at all costs. This was the final fight, and Jonathan was ready. The dawn broke over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the hidden safe house. Jonathan stood at the window, watching as the early light filtered through the trees. It was quiet now, too quiet, considering the storm that was brewing. In just a few hours, everything would change. The world would know the truth about Vincent Blackwell, about the trafficking ring, the corruption, and most of all, the betrayal that had plagued Jonathan's life. Behind him, Lily stirred on the couch. She was still weak, but she had slept through the night, her body slowly recovering from the ordeal. Jonathan had stayed awake, his mind too full of everything that had happened, everything that was about to unfold. Thomas had kept watch outside, making sure no one had followed them to the safe house. Today, it all ended. Jonathan's phone buzzed, breaking the fragile silence. It was Detective Harris. "We're ready," Harris said without preamble. "The evidence you sent is solid. We've got enough to move on Blackwell and everyone connected to him. But you understand what this means, don't you? Once this goes public, there's no turning back." Jonathan clenched his jaw. "I know. We have to do this. It's the only way to bring him down for good." Harris's voice softened slightly. "All right, but be prepared for the fallout. Blackwell has friends in high places. This is going to get messy and fast." Jonathan's grip tightened on the phone. "We're ready." Harris hung up, and Jonathan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the impending confrontation settle over him. The plan was simple but dangerous. Thomas had helped him compile all the evidence they had gathered: documents, bank statements, photos, recordings, every piece of corruption Vincent had hidden. Harris would coordinate the release to the media and law enforcement simultaneously, ensuring that Vincent had no time to silence anyone or destroy evidence. But Jonathan knew that exposing Vincent meant war. There were people in Vincent's network who would come after them, people who had everything to lose. He turned to find Thomas standing at the door, his expression grim. "It's time, isn't it?" Thomas asked, his voice steady. Jonathan nodded. "It's time." By noon, the storm had begun to hit. News outlets across the country were running with the story: "Billionaire exposed, Vincent Blackwell at the center of human trafficking ring." The headlines were brutal, and as more details emerged, the public was outraged. The media coverage was relentless, showcasing Vincent's years of criminal activity, his connections to powerful figures, and the sheer scale of his trafficking network. Jonathan watched it all unfold on the television in the safe house, his heart pounding. This was it. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. He glanced over at Lily, who sat beside him, her eyes wide as she watched the news unfold. "It's over," she whispered, but her voice was filled with uncertainty. "Not yet," Jonathan replied, his jaw clenched. "Vincent won't go down without a fight." As if on cue, Jonathan's phone buzzed again. It was Harris. "Jonathan, we've got a problem," Harris said, his tone urgent. "Vincent's people are scrambling. They're trying to cover up what they can, but more importantly, they're coming for you." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Vincent's men know you're the one who orchestrated this," Harris replied. "They're on the move, and they're looking for blood. We've got units heading to your location, but you need to get out of there. Now." Jonathan felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. He glanced at Thomas, who had heard everything. Thomas nodded grimly, already moving toward the door. "We'll leave right away," Jonathan said, his mind racing. "Just get here as soon as you can." He hung up and turned to Lily. "We have to go." Lily nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'm ready." The safe house felt like a ticking time bomb. Thomas led the way as they hurriedly packed their few belongings, preparing to leave. But just as they reached the door, the sound of tires screeching outside froze them in their tracks. Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Stay down," Thomas hissed, pulling his gun from his holster. He motioned for Jonathan and Lily to hide behind the heavy furniture near the far wall. From the window, they could see two black SUVs pulling up the driveway, men in dark suits jumping out, their faces hard, their guns drawn. Vincent's people had found them. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched beside Lily, his mind racing. They had prepared for this, but now that it was happening, it felt unreal. These men weren't here to negotiate. They were here to kill. "We'll hold them off," Thomas whispered, his eyes sharp. "Stay low, and when I give you the signal, you run for the back." Jonathan nodded, his hand tightening around the gun Thomas had given him. He wasn't a stranger to tough situations, but this was different. This was life and death. The first shot rang out, shattering the quiet. The sound of gunfire echoed through the walls as Vincent's men stormed the house, bullets ripping through windows and doors. Thomas fired back, taking out one of the men with a clean shot, but there were too many of them. They were closing in fast. "Go!" Thomas shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Jonathan grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the back door, their footsteps frantic as they darted through the narrow hallways. The sound of gunfire grew louder, and Jonathan's heart raced. They had to make it out. There was no other option. But as they reached the back door, a shadow appeared in their path. Vincent. He stood there, battered and bloodied but alive, his eyes burning with rage. He pointed a gun at Jonathan, his hand trembling from the wound Thomas had inflicted earlier. "You think you've won?" Vincent growled, his voice low and filled with venom. "You think you can take everything from me?" Jonathan stepped in front of Lily, his own gun aimed at Vincent. "It's over, Vincent. You're finished." Vincent laughed, a hollow, dangerous sound. "No, Jonathan. This isn't over. You've ruined everything, and now you're going to pay for it." Jonathan tightened his grip on the gun, his mind racing. Vincent was weak, but he was still dangerous. Jonathan had to act fast. One wrong move, and it could be over. But before either man could pull the trigger, the sound of sirens filled the air, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the darkened sky. The police had arrived. Vincent's eyes flickered with panic as he heard the sirens, realizing his time was up. Jonathan watched as the anger and desperation on Vincent's face twisted into something else, defeat. "You'll never understand, Jonathan," Vincent spat, his voice trembling. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Before Jonathan could respond, Vincent dropped the gun, his hands shaking as he fell to his knees. The weight of his crimes, his empire crumbling around him, had finally caught up to him. The door burst open as Harris and his team stormed in, guns drawn, surrounding Vincent. They cuffed him quickly, hauling him to his feet. Vincent didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him. "It's over," Harris said, looking at Jonathan with a nod. "You did it." Jonathan exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. It was over. Vincent was finally defeated, and his empire of corruption would crumble. The truth was out, and justice was on its way. He turned to Lily, who stood beside him, her eyes filled with relief and exhaustion. He reached out, taking her hand gently. "You're safe now," Jonathan whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "We're both safe." Lily smiled weakly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you, Jonathan, for everything." As the police led Vincent away and the chaos of the night began to fade, Jonathan felt the weight of it all lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just the end of Vincent's reign. It was the beginning of something new. A life where the lies were gone, where the truth had finally come to light. Jonathan stood there, holding Lily close, watching as the dawn broke over the horizon, bringing with it the promise of a new beginning.